for our next topic, we'll be discussing about Noam Chomsky's universal grammar theory. So let's have first an introduction. Who is Noam Chomsky? I'm sure that you have heard of the name Chomsky. So because if you are studying English, it will be impossible na hindi nyo maririnig yung pangalan ni Noam Chomsky. Lagi na may mention yan sa English kaysa language. Okay? So Noam Chomsky in full name is Avram Noam Chomsky, who was born on December 7, 1928, and he is still alive at Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, USA. So he's an American theoretical linguist whose work from the 1950s revolutionized the field of linguistics by treating language as a uniquely human, biologically based cognitive capacity. So we'll be explaining later on why he treated language as a uniquely human and biologically based cognitive capacity. So Noam Chomsky at the University of Pennsylvania is where he studied and where he earned a doctoral degree in linguistics in 1955, and then he began teaching at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, or commonly known as the very famous MIT, where today he is institute professor in the Department of Linguistics and Philosophy. Okay, then let's define now what is universal grammar's theory according to Noam Chomsky. So according to him, universal grammar is taken to be the set of properties, condition, or whatever that constitute the initial state of the language learner, hence the basis on which develops on which language on which knowledge of a language develops. Okay? So we will be expanding this definition as we go through with the discussion. Okay, now this is the main point of what universal grammar is. So according to Noam Chomsky, universal grammar theory proposed that humans possess innate faculties related to the acquisition of language. What he is trying to say is that yung mga tao, meron na raw yung kakayahan na mag-organize ng thoughts and ideas ng just like the grammar itself. They already have the idea of what grammar itself just the moment they were born. Kumbaga naka-stuck na raw yun sa utak ng tao. And the grammar that we're referring here is not similar to how we look at the proper grammar structure, not that one. But instead, nakaka-recognize at nakakaintindi na sila nung language na kanilang naririnig. Okay? So since the 1980s, the term has often been capitalized. The term is also known as the Universal Grammar Theory, or sometimes it is called the UG. So abbreviated form UG. And take note of this statement. This is what I mentioned a while ago, that universal grammar is not to be confused with universal language, or with the deep structure of language, or even with grammar itself. But again, what we're trying to point out here is that universal grammar is not a grammar, but rather a theory of grammars, a kind of meta-theory or a schematism for grammar. So nakakaintindi naman tayo when we talk of schema, di ba? When we talk of schema, ito yung mga prior knowledge na habang nadadagdagan, mas na-expound yung ating kaalaman sa isang bagay. So for instance, a child might not be aware of the words that we are using, but whenever they heard of that particular word, they are reacting. Although their cognitive level is not yet developed as compared to an adult, they still have this ability to recognize sounds, the phonemes. Okay? And these phonemes somehow can be associated to as to how they understand a certain word that they heard. Okay, for example, have you ever tried to have a conversation with a baby? It's all good, this and that, not a particular scintillating conversation. So whenever you're talking to your siblings, to your younger sibling, di ba papansin nyo yung kinakos siya, gu 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 ga 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 ga. Ginagano-ganon nyo sila when you are talking to them. So, but although those are just sounds that we are producing, say mama, papa, those are only just sounds that we are producing. But the children or those child who are at the age of infancy are acting. Okay, so you might think that babies don't understand anything that's being said to them, which is in a sense true. They might be understanding what we are telling them, but they are reacting. Okay, again, they are reacting on what we are telling them. So babies don't comprehend the words that are being said to them. Rather, they do possess an innate ability to understand the sound of the human voice, to discriminate between parts of language. So, kumbaga, kapag naririnig na ng bata yung gu 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 ga 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 na ginagawa sa kanya ng paulit-ulit, so tumatatak sa isipan niya yon na parang nakikipaglaro siya. Even though that is not an accurate language or an accurate word that we are using, but whenever the child heard of that particular sound, meron agad siyang ina-attach na meaning to that. Meron agad siyang ina-attach na ibig sabihin ng sound na naririnig niya. So, kung para sa kanya, yung gugu, gaga, na paulit-ulit mo, ang kanyang understanding of that is that gusto niyo makipaglaro sa kanya, kaya siya ngumingiti. Kaya siya tumatawa ng tumatawa. Plus, nakikita niya rin yung facial expression natin na nakakadagdag din doon sa meaning. Again, when we talk of language, we're not only referring to the words that we are using to them. Again, language can be in a different form. Could be in a form of a sound, could be in a form of non-verbal cues, diba? So that's what we meant of language. So when a child sees or hears those those languages that we are using to converse with them, they are actually creating a meaning out of that. Okay? So, kumbaga, yun yung observation ni Chomsky. If a child could react to that and could somehow, parang nauunawaan yung sinasabi niya, is it possible that the child, at a very young age, has already developed that certain understanding? And that understanding can be considered as a grammar on part of the child. Okay, it might not be the standard grammar that we are using whenever we're conversing to others, but the child himself or herself is actually creating his own grammatical structure in order for the child to understand the things that is being conversed to him or to her. So you get the point of of what Chomsky is trying to tell us. Nasabi niya nga, it's an innate ability. Nasa tao na mismo yung kakayahan nating ah, magbigay ng kahulugan doon sa sinasabi ng isang tao sa atin o pinapakita sa atin ng isang tao o ng adult during our childhood days. Okay? So with that kind of understanding na na meron siya, there's a possibility nga that there is an innate ability of a children, of an infant to to create his or her own way of understanding structure. Yung gu 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 ga ga ga, it might be different on the usual grammatical structure that we have na there's a noun, there's a verb, and there's an object. Yung subject, verb, object structure. Kung sa atin meron tayong ganyung sinusunod sila, meron din silang sariling way of understanding it. Okay? And that's what makes somehow um, universal grammar in a sense. Okay? Kumbaga, um, it does not necessarily mean that it should always have the subject predicate structure. Okay? But the universal grammar that we are pertaining here is on the way that the infant or the way that the children create their own structure of grammar that will make them understand it. So we also have the so-called generative grammar. Later on, we'll be defining what generative grammar is. But according to generative grammarians, they believe that human species evolved a genetically universal grammar common to all peoples and that the variability in modern languages is basically on the surface only, according to Michael Tomasello. Okay, so it only tells us what universal grammar is. Kaya nga sinabi ng generative grammarians. So, generative grammar. So when we talk of generative grammar, it refers to the set of rules that enables us to understand sentences, but of which we are usually totally unaware. Just like the child, di ba? Just like yung bata na yung sound lang, meron siyang sariling pamamaraan doon na unawain yung sinasabi even though the child might not be aware of it, but the child's cognitive level might be creating something that will really help him to understand or to converse to us. Okay? So, halimbawa, meron kang kausap, merong bata kang kausap, sinabi mo, Bob loves him. And versus Bob knows that his father loves him. We just know that they are different. Okay? So, we just know that they are different. But we do not know exactly why is it that they are different. But still, we just know that they are different. There are times that we just understand the meaning of a statement, but we cannot explain what makes them different. Okay, and with that ability to understand makes grammar universal at some point, according to generative grammar. Another one, that's how you say it versus how that's you say it. That's how that's you it say. So if you're just going to look at it, there's really something wrong with the grammar. Okay? There's something wrong with the grammar. We know that there's something wrong with the grammar, but we cannot actually explain what's wrong with the grammar. But the important thing about it is that we understand what the person is telling us. Okay? So with that ability to understand makes it easier for us to tell that o nga no, um, meron tayong different ways of understanding a specific language. Even though it's different from the grammar that we're using, it's different from what others are using, but still we're able to understand the meaning of that statement uh, because as a human being, we have this ability to to think. We have this ability to have that kind of cognition to understand things. Okay, so but we have to point out here that generative grammar has something to do with grammar textbooks whose purpose is simply to explain what is grammatically correct and incorrect in a given language. So when we talk of generative grammar, it's only telling us to to it's only explaining to us how human being understand a specific language that they are using in a set of sentence. Okay, it does not necessarily mean that you have to be correct or incorrect in your statement, but what is most important is that the ability to understand sentence that we are using. The same is true with the child, to the infant who is not actually knowledgeable of what grammar is, but still the child can understand us. Okay? Chomsky did not believe that exposure to a language was enough for a young child to become efficient at understanding and producing a language. So for Chomsky, i-expose mo man yan o hindi mo man na-expose, yung bata, matututo at matututo ng language na alam niya. Okay, kaya yung tanong kanina na, Sir, what if the child exposed or not exposed? So, sabi ni Chomsky, even if you're not exposed, since it is innate to your ability to understand language, to learn language, then matututo at matututo ka raw. Ito yung paniniwala ni Chomsky. Kaya nga, there are some arguments, there are some criticism on his belief when it comes to um, ability of a child to learn languages. Kasi ginawa niyang parang comparison is that what makes us different from the animals is that we human beings, we have the high level of cognition. We have that high level of cognitive, we have that higher level of cognitive level as compared to the animals. Your ability to understand things based on our cognitive level can actually be manifested as to learn a specific language. So, kaya niniwala siya na pinanganak ang isang tao na matalino or may kakayanang umunawa at kakayanang matuto ng language. Ito kanyang paniniwala eh. So, according to Chomsky's theory, the basic structures of language are already encoded in the human brain at birth. Take note of that. The universal grammar theory suggests that every language has some of the same laws. So, if the basic grammar laws are the same for all languages, a child needs only to follow the particular set of rules the child's peers follow in order to understand and produce their native language. So, dito ngayon papasok yung first language acquisition. Okay? So, kung ano yung natutunan ng bata sa loob ng bahay nila, that is what we call the first language acquisition. So, dito ngayon dito ngayon nagde-deviate yung sinasabi ni Chomsky na kung saan nga ay hindi niya pa rin itinatakwil na may impluwensya pa rin naman yung mga tao sa paligid para maitama yung ginagamit na salita ng mga bata. Yun naman yung point niya. But that necessarily mean na hindi niya totally pinapaboran yung social cultural aspect as a factor for language acquisition and learning. Pero ang pinakang point niya nga is that ang tatandaan niyo lang pag sinabi natin universal grammar is ang isang bata, ang isang individual has an innate ability to understand language based on his or her own understanding. Okay, na kahit hindi mo siya masyadong expose sa tao, sabi niya ay matututo at matututo ng lingwahe sa pamamaraan niya. Again, matututo at matututo ng language sa pamamaraang alam niya. Ngayon, para maitama, kung mayroon mang mali doon sa kanyang natutunan sa kanyang sariling pamamaraan, diyan ngayon papasok yung mga tao sa paligid niya. Kaya nga sabi niya, child's environment determines which language he or she will use. But, hindi niya pa rin tinatanggi, but he or she is born with the tools to learn any language effectively. That tools is yung kanyang ability to comprehend, yung kanyang cognitive level. Okay. If we look at grammar as the laws of language, we could say that all humans are born with understanding of these laws. Laws are principles. While different languages may have different kinds of grammar, humans have a natural predilection to learn and use them. Okay? Hence, we can say that Chomsky held that it is the discovery through the application of formal systems. Pag sinabi natin application of formal systems, dito na ngayon papasok yung pag-aaral natin ng grammar sa loob ng eskwelahan. Okay? Of the innate principles that make possible the swift acquisitions of language by children and the ordinary use of language by children and adults alike. Kaya nga, may interview kay Chomsky sabi niya, if a child can learn language or can understand language on his own, ang tanong sa kanya is, bakit pa kailangan mag-aral ng grammar? Why is it necessary for us to learn grammar? So according to Chomsky, language is evolving. Just like yung pinakita ko sa inyo, di ba kanina, na gumagamit ng mga non-binary pronouns. That's one way of saying that language is really evolving. Yung paggamit ng slang, yung paggamit natin na binabaliktad yung mga salita, sigarilyo, yosi, pantalon, lonta, yung mga salitang balbal na yon, it manifests that language is truly evolving, and even the sentence structure that we are using is evolving as we merge them with using the sentence. And on the first place, it is a way for us to follow a certain norm that is governing in our society. So, meron kasing dinidikta rin ng ating lipunan na ito dapat ang gamitin natin kapag ito ang kausap. Ito dapat ang language na gagamitin ninyo kapag kayo magsusulat ng research paper. ganito dapat ang tunog ng inyong pagsusulat kapag kayo nagsusulat ng letter. So the society itself is dictating us on what to do. Hence, the need for us to understand the grammar to understand grammar, the technical side of grammar is only for the purpose for us to to address the need of what is prevalent in our society. Yung norm na sinusunod natin. Yung standard na sinusunod natin. So imagine a world wherein we do not have that standard way of saying it. Even though we might be understanding each other, although we are using a different words based on just the sound that we are using. So remember during the time when people do not actually have the concept of language, wherein during the time people would just say hu hu ha ha ha, yung mga ganun lang sila. But they could really understand each other based on that sounds that they are producing. So if we're just going to imagine that kind of life that we have now at present. Okay? So now with the evolution of language, the the um, the sentence structure also evolved, and as sentence structure evolved, there is a need for us to also be observant on the proper way of using a specific language on a specific occasion, on a specific scenario or situation. Very open-minded naman sa mga ganong bagay si Chomsky when it comes to his theory of universal grammar. Ang pinupunto niya lang kasi naman dito, kaya nga sabi niya, there's nothing to argue about. There's nothing to debate about this theory. What I would just like to point out here is that human by nature has the ability to understand. He's not saying na tama man o mali yan, tama man o mali yung grammar mo, hindi yun yung kanyang argument. Ang argument niya lang dito is that ang tao ay may kakayahang umunawa ng language sang-ayon sa kanya. May kakayahan siya umunawa ng sarili niyang grammar. Okay, so yun lang naman gusto niyang i-point out doon. Kaya sinasabi niya, there's nothing to argue about it. Okay? So, yun lang naman yung pinupunto niya doon sa kanyang universal grammar theory. Now, the question, bakit ba tinawag na universal grammar? Yung ability ng mga tao na umunawa at gumawa ng sariling understanding doon sa kanilang sariling grammar, what makes grammar universal. Okay, to sum it up, so Chomsky says that children are born with a knowledge of the principles of the grammatical structure of all languages, and this inward knowledge explains the success and speed with which they learn language. Okay? Okay? So these are the references that we use. Okay. So, I think may mga mga question. Yes, tama siya yung hindi naniniwala sa tabula rasa, si Chomsky. Oo. Kasi di ba pag sinabi natin tabula rasa, yung kay John Locke, na blank page tayo. Hindi sabi ni Chomsky, hindi tayo blank page. Kasi meron tayong alam from the very beginning. So, kumbaga, ang kanya kasing idea, from the scientific point of view niya, ay, ang utak ng tao, may laman na yan. Ang utak ng tao may laman. Kumbaga, halimbawa, lahat naman ng tao, meron tayong tibang mga macro skills, basic macro skills. Yung ability to hear, ability to write, ability to read, ano ba, nakalimutan ko, to hear, yan, to speak, yan, mga and visuals. Kumbaga yung mga yon, nandiyan na sa utak natin. So, naniniwala siya na ang utak ng tao from the very beginning may laman. At kasama dun sa kaalamang yun, sa loob ng utak ng tao, yung knowledge of grammar. Yung knowledge of grammar na tinutukoy niya rito, again, is not referring to the correct way of using subject agreement or what or that. Yung grammar na tinutukoy niya rito is yung kakayahan ng tao na umunawa doon sa language na kanyang ginagamit. Okay?